Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session with an experienced sport professional. This is Dr. Tim Rice coming to you. And today I have Dr. Paul Ashbrook, who I'm speaking with from San Diego, California, and a young man that I've worked with quite a bit in the past as actually I was on his doctoral dissertation committee at the University of the Rockies, and also worked with him in class when he had some of my classes at the university. And so, Paul, welcome to today's session. We're really excited to hear more about you, and looking forward to having a great conversation. So thanks so much.
Definitely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to pass along any insights that I can. So
great. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Just give us a little bit of a background on Paul Ashbrook.
Yeah, so I've been an athlete pretty much all my life. I love sports. It was something that had always been a passion of mine. And so throughout like middle school, high school, I really fell in love with golf. And golf was something that I played at a fairly high level. I played pretty competitively, kind of in like local tournaments and even in some more like bigger amateur stuff. Like I tried to qualify for the US Amateur. I tried to qualify for the US Open. So, I was a reasonably accomplished player through high school. My hope was that when I went to college, I was going to play collegiately, and eventually that would take me into the professional ranks. Now, when I went to college, so I went to undergrad at the University of California, Riverside, and my freshman year, I tried to walk onto the men's golf team there. I missed making the team by, it was like a shot or two. And so really disappointing, but at that point in time, I still had the mentality of, hey, I'm going to push through it. I'm going to find a way to overcome. But a couple months after that, I hurt myself really, really severely. So I basically tore the patella tendon in my right knee and didn't pick up a golf club for close to a year. And even after that, for several years, like I just didn't have the same level of strength. I didn't have the same level of movement that I could. So it was like really, really like derailing. All of that being said, like I still had this mentality of, hey, you know what? I'm going to play golf for a living. And it was something that I really believed in. Well, I had a friend of mine who was a faculty member at UC Riverside, and she was just a TA in one of my classes, and we just kind of hit it off. And she was like, hey, have you ever thought about grad school? And I said, honestly, no. This isn't something that I really have ever thought about. My grades were not particularly good at that point in time. I was always somebody who would pay attention. I'd listen. I wasn't, screwing around in the back of the class, but I didn't sort of really push myself to be great. And so she said, hey, like, let me help you out. So long story short, she ends up helping me find a way into grad school and find my way into sports psychology. And so I had a familiarity with sports psychology because as a golfer, it was something that I always tried to utilize myself to improve my own game. So it was kind of like a normal transition. Hey, utilize something that I already know, something that I'm fairly good at. I get along with people. I'm able to relate to people. They come to me. And so it was a really good fit. And so I ended up going to San Diego State, going there for a couple of years, really, really loved the program there. And at that point in time, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go out and do consulting. And that was kind of my thought moving forward. Now, at that point, you really start to realize this is not easy. It takes some time to develop a client base. It takes some time to get opportunities. And I was lucky enough that I did get some early opportunities working in golf at the Division I level, but they were unpaid. And while it was fun to like get the swag and it was fun to interact with the players, it wasn't doing a great job paying my bills. And so for me, I then sought out some other alternatives where I started teaching as an adjunct. And so that gave me additional opportunities from a theoretical understanding. And then it gave me more experience. And then I kind of realized, hey, I really enjoy the teaching aspect of sports psych in addition to the consulting piece. And so after, I graduated from my master's in 2010. I went back to Rockies starting in 2014, I think. Maybe was it 2014? Maybe 2012, actually. I think it took me 4 years all told. And so it was a way to enhance sort of my academic standing and improve my abilities to get more faculty work and things like that. But it also would help me be a better practitioner. And so that was kind of the idea about going back to school, getting my doctorate. And at this point, it's kind of like a balance between I do applied consulting and I teach as a faculty member. So that's a very sort of like overview on sort of my background and kind of what got me to where I'm at now.
Well, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that. One of the things for anyone that's listening, watching today, Paul actually went through the University of Rockies PsyD program in sport and performance psychology. I've been a lead faculty member at, was a lead faculty member at University of Rockies before we merged with Ashford University in San Diego, and I am still in that position. Dr. Ashbrook has actually, gone out and he's being pretty modest. He's done a lot of good stuff. His dissertation actually was just put into a peer-reviewed journal. So, that's something that not everyone can do. Tell us a little bit about that experience, Paul, and how that went.
So the dissertation process was probably the hardest thing that I went through at Rockies. The academic piece wasn't super challenging in the sense that it was a lot of concepts that I was familiar with from my master's program. It was a lot of concepts that I had taught as a faculty member. So I was comfortable in the sort of educational piece, but I had never really done formal research. So that was a challenge. And then obviously all of the different hurdles that you have to overcome, from just creating a proposal that you think is really, really solid, really, really sound, and then all of a sudden you have to start from scratch because your chairperson or committee member is like, yeah, this isn't going to work or it's not going to fly. So being able to sort of be dynamic and open to different opportunities that kind of present themselves. The one suggestion the one piece of advice that I wish I would have listened to from some of the people that talked to me about the dissertation was, this is not the only sort of step along the way. And you have a choice in terms of, do you choose to make this sort of my life's end and I'm going to go 110% and give everything I have? Or is this just a step along the way and I want to provide something good, but also get into my professional endeavors? I was lucky enough that I went route number one, where I tried to invest everything because I had this great idea and I wanted to do something that was really, really valuable to the work that I did in applied world. The problem is that it took forever. With all of the approvals, with all of the actual time to write it, not to mention the fact that the study itself took close to a year, it was like a 2-year process just to go from dissertation to finishing it, getting it approved, graduating. Now, the reason I say that it worked out in the long run is I was able to take that information, I was able to condense it, and then ultimately get it published, which big picture is going to be really valuable for me as a professional in academia. But if that's not the route that you're looking to go, that's unnecessary time that you could be out there in the workforce. That's unnecessary time that you could be out there doing other things instead of working on your dissertation that is just, bleeding you dry. So that's kind of the biggest takeaway I have, is just try and find something that's interesting, find something that's engaging, but at the same time understand that it's a stepping stone. It's not the only thing that you will do for the rest of your life.
Yeah, great advice too. And when it comes to, I think, any academic program that a person goes through, a lot of times people look at it only from the perspective of the curriculum, the classes you have to take, all the things that you have to do. I mean, granted, you do have to kind of play the game to get through it sometimes, and Paul's no exception. None of us are that have gone through and earned doctoral degrees, because a lot of it is truly up here and battling and playing the game that you have to play. And again, I was kind of, because I was a committee member for Paul's study, I certainly challenged him on specific areas, but, he also had a really great committee one person who, Dr. Andy Gillum, who was his chair, and then also myself and another individual from outside of the university who is one of Paul's actually mentors, if I'm not mistaken. And I think, being able to go through that makes a huge difference in how you approach your practice and how you approach what you do in this field. Would you agree with that?
I would 100% agree that something that I try and emphasize as an instructor to the students that I work with is the idea of evidence-based practice. It's hugely important that the work that we do is grounded in empirical research. It's grounded in theory. And to be a part of that and to be able to say, you know what, I contributed to that not only as a practitioner, but as a researcher, and can show, hey, this is the appropriate way of working with clients. It gives me instant credibility when I'm working with clients, but it also makes me just like confident in my own abilities to do the work that I believe that I can do, because I have proved it to other professionals within the field that, hey, this route or this approach is actually valuable. It can be helpful.
Correct. And I think it's so very, very important. One of the biggest things that I do in my world as a faculty member for a number of universities is ask the question, so what? When someone says, well, this point I'm making is this, and this. Well, okay. How can you back that up? What have you done to actually prove, not even just from the standpoint of research on your own, but even just digging it out and finding others? I think that's very critical.
So yeah, I work with interns in some of the classes that I teach, where I supervise their certification hours. And so one of the things that I will tell them is, I'm not here to tell you what the right or wrong way to approach a client is. Like that's not my job, and I don't want to take that responsibility, because we're going to have different perspectives on the best way to treat a situation. But what I want you to understand is you have to be able to back it up with theoretical research, theoretical understanding. And as long as you can back it up and say, hey, this is why I'm going this route, here's what the literature says. I may not agree with it. It may not be how I would approach it from my professional practice. But if you have that understanding, I can't tell you you're wrong. But if you just go and say, I'm going to do this because I feel like it, then we're going to have a problem, because everybody has an opinion, right? And it doesn't mean that it's right.
Exactly. And, it kind of leads to the next question. And that is, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis in a consulting role, as well as in your teaching role with sport and performance psychology students or clients?
So I've been lucky enough, for the most part, from a consulting perspective, to have clients who are engaged in the process. There are some times where you will have clients who are, for lack of a better term, they're forced there, whether it's by their coaches, their parents, some other third party. And it's clear that they don't want to be a part of that. And it's kind of like banging your head against a wall. So I've been lucky enough, I haven't really run into that too frequently. The issue that I've run into more often is kind of I don't know if it's our modern society. I don't know if it's just people not comfortable sort of having conflict, so to speak. But usually when you are in the middle of a consulting relationship, sometimes they just abruptly end. And you would hope that they would end in sort of this happy, hey, like, here's a closing session. Like, let's get you headed off on the right track. If you need anything in the future, seek me out. But more often than not, they just kind of vanish, and you're kind of left to wonder, was it something I did? Is it something that's going on in their life? There's a lot of sort of gray area about, could I have done something differently? And obviously we're always trying to learn from our past experiences, what went well, what didn't go well. And so that makes it very difficult. The other consulting piece is, I think a lot of clients expect you to be able to change outcomes, right? Like, we can influence them, we can help them, but if they don't see the results that they want within a time period that they believe, it's very easy for them to cut bait and say, all right, well, I'm going to find somebody else, even though you as a consultant may have done nothing wrong. So understanding that. Now, from the academia piece, I'd say the biggest issues I tend to run into is people not understanding the value of feedback or not understanding the value of sort of supervision. I remember when I was in my master's program and I was finishing it up, I was going through the ASP certification process, and my mentor, Doug, who was the committee member you mentioned, the first time I sent him any sessions to review, I was so excited because I felt like I had been doing really, really strong work, and I was really proud of the work that I did. And he came back and he just ripped it apart. And it literally was like getting a punch to the gut. Like, it just was the most uncomfortable I think I've felt in quite some time. And he reminded me, he's like, it's not that you did anything wrong, so to speak, but my job as an instructor is to push you to be better. And if I just say, hey, good job, Paul, like, that's not going to push you to be better. So I have to dig, I have to poke, I have to go above and beyond to find the things that need improvement. And so when I'm working with students as an instructor or as a supervisor or whatever it might be, I try and convey that to them, that, hey, it's not personal. Like, I'm not going out of my way to make things hard on you. I'm not going out of my way to, mark you down. But if I see something wrong, I'm going to call you on it. And you need to have the wherewithal to say, hey, you know what? It's not personal. I messed up. I did something wrong. Let me fix it. But a lot of times people take it personally and they view it as some sort of personal attack against them, that they're not good enough, that I'm going out of my way to make things difficult. And it's like, no, I have very high expectations. This field has very high expectations. So if you can't meet my expectations, then you're probably not going to be able to meet the expectations of the field. And then that does me a disservice as an instructor, because it makes me look bad. It makes the programs that I work at look bad. And that's not acceptable.
Well, and I would jump on that and say that, it is kind of I think we have many times in society these days, people are challenged on a specific area, and if it's not, if it's a grade that they don't think they deserve, or it's tough love, if you will. Mm-hmm. A lot of times folks do have problems with that. And I say to all my students, I'm like, that your success is my success. So if you're going to be successful, I'm going to be pushing you to be successful, right, which makes me, successful too in my role. And, one thing I wanted to add as the next question, what are some skills that you think are essential for success in the sport performance psychology world?
Yeah. You have to be very confident. You have to be very sure of yourself. Now, there's a thin line between sort of cockiness and arrogance that, I know everything, but you have to own your piece of it, right? Because everybody's going to do things a little bit differently. And the difference between me and Tim, for example, may not be that much, right? So what's going to differentiate me versus Tim to a prospective client? Like, I have to own my process. I have to own the values that I hold, and being genuine, being authentic, that goes a long way to meeting that too. I tell clients up front, there are certain things that I will do and there are certain things that I won't do. Like, I will go out of my way to try and give them the best service that I possibly can. But obviously there are bounds to my competence, and I set that up front. There are certain ways that we'll communicate, but really it comes down to, you have to trust me, right? Like, I'm the expert here. I want what's in your best interest, and understand that a lot of times you may take a step back before you can take one or two steps forward. And so just really trying to set proper expectations, I think, is also really, really important as well.
What, as far as, thinking about the way that the world of, or the field of sports psychology has perhaps changed, and this would also go into sport management and pretty much any field these days, is the impact of technology and social media
Mhm.
on sport and performance psychology. How has that changed your job?
So it's funny because I actually presented on this at a conference in January. So when I first started consulting, so this would have been back in probably 2010, 2011, you're looking for any clients that will take you at that point. So you're willing to take any work. Now, I took some online sort of distance learning work, and it was terrible. It went so badly. We talked about earlier, hey, parents putting their kids into consulting and their kid doesn't want to be there. These were those situations where I'm chasing after the kid. They're not showing up to sessions. When they're there at sessions, they're not fully engaged. And it just was a mess. It didn't work well. Now, so I took some time away from it and I said to myself, all right, I need to kind of reflect on how I approach this. And so I conceptualized sort of the way that I wanted to approach it. And so I made some adjustments more recently. And it's actually been really, really beneficial because 5 years ago, we wouldn't have the ability to work with a client overseas. We wouldn't have the ability to work with a client who may be at competition. If we did, we'd have to be there with them. But I can do it from the comfort of my own house with my wife, my family. So it makes it a lot easier to make those long-lasting connections and actually do quality work. But it's not as simple as, hey, let's pull somebody up on FaceTime and let's just communicate. Like, I think that there are very specific processes that need to be in place to lead to the best outcomes. Something that I do with every client that I work with electronically or digitally is before I start working with them, I have to meet them in person. Like, no questions asked. Like, you can call me, we can have a consultation over the phone. All of that's great. But I will not start working with you until we actually physically meet. Because for me, I don't want you to waste your time. I don't want to waste your money. And I don't really want to waste my time, right? If we start this relationship and it's not going anywhere, that's not beneficial to anybody. So you can usually hash that out pretty quickly when you meet somebody in person, right? You can see, hey, are we going to get along? Are we going to vibe? Now, time is money, right? They say time is money. And so I'm not just going to go travel someplace for an hour and say, all right, cool. Like, we met for an hour. I'm going to go back home. That's not cost effective. So at the minimum, I require a 4-hour sort of half-day commitment. Now, that serves two purposes. Purpose number one is obviously the rapport piece. Are we going to get along? Are we not going to get along? I also am able to collect a ton of observational data because a lot of times with the clients I work with, I'll meet them at their training facility. I'll meet them at, competition, whatever it might be. So I'm able to collect a lot of observational data that will help me in future work with them. And then the last piece that I think is underappreciated is I actually give them something. So usually within that 4-hour period, an hour to an hour and a half is devoted to like education. So there are some core philosophies that I adhere to with pretty much all the clients that I work with. And so I give them sort of that foundational core knowledge because it's going to help anybody, regardless of who you are. If you kind of gain this foundational knowledge, it's going to make you a better performer. So at the end of that 4 hours, not only have they been able to say, do I like Paul? Are we going to get along? I'm able to collect information that's going to help me if we choose to move forward in the consulting relationship. And I've left them with something that they can actually tangibly use. So when they're using it and they're experiencing success, they'll say, yeah, you know what? Paul knows what he's talking about. Let me go and maybe do a longer package where we can start doing it electronically. So once we transition into the more electronic aspect of it, we can do all digital consulting. It's very easy, but we're also human. And so what I make sure that I include in my pricing, in my package, is one travel session, or what I term a travel session. So it's another 4 to 5 hours where I'll go visit them. It could be a competition. It could just be training, whatever it might be, to reconnect at a human level. It keeps that rapport built. It keeps that rapport strong. So we don't have those times where it's like, we're just two faces on a computer screen, right? We're still humans. We still have that human connection. And it's worked really, really well for me. So I've been able to kind of utilize technology in the past year and a half and really make it valuable to my business that 5 years ago, it was something that I was not wanting to utilize, not wanting to do.
Well, and even looking at what we're doing right now,
Mhm.
you know, you're sitting in San Diego, California. I'm sitting in Fargo, North Dakota. And, you know, we're on Zoom, which is an incredible technology. By the way, anyone watching, as of April 16th, 2019, you can get, if you have a Google account, you can get Zoom up to 40 minutes for free at any time. And it's a great thing because you can share your screen, you can do PowerPoint
Mhm.
presentations, you can do interviews,
Yep.
have them uploaded to the cloud. I think it's really important to use technologies like these, like this rather, and what you're talking about too. I know for me, I work with coaches and clients over in Ireland and all other parts of the United States using Zoom, and I'll have conversations with them. And I think it's really critical to have that. Tell me a little bit about, you know, one of the things with this, the people I'll be watching, you know, obviously you're going to have different, you know, people that are very interested in sport performance psychology. You're going to have a lot of people in the sport management field. But in both areas, networking is so incredibly important. Tell
Mhm.
me about your thoughts on networking and perhaps your approach to networking.
Yeah. So also something that has changed significantly the more that I've done. Networking is really important. And it's it can't be understated that it's going to open up a lot of doors down the road. Now, I'm somebody who typically keeps a fairly small circle. It's just my personality. I like being able to trust people. I like sort of having like people that I can rely on. And so my network or my social circle tends to be smaller. Now, what I've done to help me is I primarily work in golf. And obviously, having gone through golf when I was younger, I had all of these connections that I kind of let slide. And looking back on it, I'm like, man, I had all of these like pre-existing connections that I could have utilized. And so when I realized that, I went back to them and touched base. You know, sometimes you have to make those olive branches and say, hey, like, what's new? What's going on? And not necessarily from a, hey, what can you do for me? But really just to be genuine, right? Be a human. And what I've found is some of these have led to other networking opportunities. Some of them have petered out. Some of them have just been reconnecting with old friends. And so, you know, you don't have to necessarily have an agenda with your sort of networking, but be open to the people that you used to know, be open to the people that you might come across, and really just, I say start small. You know, you're not going to be able to network with every single big player in your particular field. But if you can start small, you get to know one person. Well, that one person may know 5 people, and then 5 people know 10 people. And it's about getting your name to the right people instead of getting it to every person. You know, people can cold call, people can just give out business cards. And it's like, if I don't know you, if I don't trust you, I'm going to probably just toss your information. But if you take the time to get to know me, you ask me questions, yeah, I'm more than happy to like work with you and help you out. And so for me, it's let me just find some common ground. Let me start small and, you know, let's see where it goes. You know, the more like-minded individuals you have, the better. I think that's actually one thing that has been valuable for me is finding like-minded people, because you can have a lot of people who may be in a field, but if you don't see eye to eye, you guys are going in different directions. But if you have somebody who works in, say, a similar field, so for instance, I have some golf instructors and fitness instructors who, from a philosophy perspective, we see really, really closely, and we understand that, hey, we kind of stay in our own lanes. I'm the mental guy, you're the physical guy. But if we combine their forces, it's kind of like Transformers, right? It's like the whole Voltron thing, where we're better together than independent from one another. And so we kind of use each other to facilitate benefits for both of us. So finding like-minded people who you have these similar goals, these similar ideas, and you work together instead of competing against one another, right?
Well, and I think I'm glad you mentioned that at the end. You know, I think what we see a lot of times in the sport world, and believe me, it's an extremely competitive world that in sport. I know for me, when I was named the head coach at Hiram College back in 2003, there were 275 applicants, and then I was the one selected. And a lot of it had to do with people I knew, of course, and I would hope to think my competence and ability, although some people may disagree after those 3 years. But one thing I would say is that, I agree with you. I think that I think that the one thing I noticed in Europe when I worked in Ireland for almost a year and still work with folks over there is that, yes, it's a very competitive environment, but I think that people want to get better. They want to see improvement because I think that makes the game, the sport better,
right?
Which obviously makes everyone else better. It kind of makes it rises the boat up a little bit more.
A rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that that's something that's very, very important. Now, as far as your opinion, what do you think is the importance? Tell us a little bit about the importance of presentation, whether that's verbal presentation, written presentation, speaking to a group. How important is that to do that well?
I mean, obviously, I think being articulate goes a long way to engendering trust. In terms of like sort of physical presentation, I don't really know. I try and keep myself like one of the guys or one of the girls. Like I don't try and sort of seem above them, because in my role as a consultant, the idea is we're on the same team, right? We're working towards the same goals, the same objectives. Yes, I am a professional and I may be sort of above you professionally, but I see us more along the lines of like peers and working together. So I don't want to create this sort of authority complex, right? So I'm usually a little bit more casual just in the way that I tend to dress when I'm teaching classes or when I'm going to events or things like that. But I mean, obviously, be thoughtful, be articulate, make sure that the presentations are prepared. John Wooden once said, preparation prevents piss poor performance. And so it doesn't guarantee success that if you're prepared for them, but it goes a long way to making you feel comfortable. It goes a long way to the group or the client feeling like, yeah, he knows what he's talking about because he prepared for it. I take copious notes during sessions and after sessions. I like keep track of all that. I'll take a quick look before session so I kind of know what to expect. I know what, presenting issues there are. And so it's about doing your homework, understanding what the situation calls for. If I go to a golf tournament and I'm in a 3-piece suit, I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb, right? So showing up in a polo and shorts as a golfer, that makes sense, right? I'm just one of the guys at that point in time. So understanding sort of the context of the environment.
And as far as like, as you know, I'm kind of a stickler on the details when it comes to presentation. And, one of the things that I see, and I work, as folks that have watched these videos in the past, they know I work with 5 universities and I've worked with 9 over the last, 10, 11 years in the online setting. And no joke, all 9 universities, we have the same issue, and it is a lack of interest in being very, very good at writing and presentation and things like that. I mean, how important is that? Like if, say, for instance, you've come up with a sales letter, or you've come up with some kind of, contract or whatever, or advertisement. How important is it?
Immensely important, right? Like that's potentially the first visibility that they have to you. And what you have represents you. It represents your brand. It represents your culture. So for instance, let's say I'm grading a paper and first title page I see, it's done improperly. It leaves an impression, intentional or not, about you taking interest or taking value in the work that you've submitted. Same thing where if you have a website and there's a misspelled word, I get it. We're all human. We make these mistakes. But if you don't have the time or the attention to detail to proofread your work multiple times to make sure that they're not basic errors, that reflects really poorly on you as a practitioner. It reflects very poorly on you as a student, because those are easy things, right? It takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort. But if you do them, you don't get extra points. But if you don't do them, you get major, major demerits. Like, it's just, it speaks such volumes about you and your attention to detail, your conscientiousness. It's just, yeah, I can't I can't even begin to explain how irked I get when I'm looking at a website, when I'm looking at a document and there's a misspelling. Oh, I have a funny story, actually. So me and my wife were looking to buy a house, and so we're going through sort of all of the pre-approval process and all of that. And so I'm working with my real estate guy, and so he sends me over this secure link, blah, 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 to upload all of my financial documents. And so I'm going through the list and I'm uploading all my documents, and there was a misspelling in one of the like attachments, because obviously clearly it's a small group and they like manually typed it in. And so I like gave him a call. I'm like, hey, just a heads up, like, you need to clean that up because it looks really, really bad. But yeah, even like in like professional endeavors like that, it's just, it's like seeing it in neon. Like, I see it and it's obvious. I'm like, no, that's not acceptable.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. And, you know, the interesting thing is that, you know, I've done, I think, 8 or 9 of these videos, and every single person pretty much said the same thing, that it's extremely important. And, perhaps the folks that are watching now understand that, you know, that it does matter in this field. I know a story I have, and I'll share it real quickly, is that once upon a time, you know, when I was an assistant coach at Grove City College, a Division III school north of Pittsburgh, you know, there was a position out east in Philadelphia area for a head men's basketball job in D3 out there. And I took it upon myself to drive out there. I was actually on a recruiting trip out that way, but I went out there and I stopped in and I knocked on the door of the provost, and I said, hey, I'd love to talk with you about my candidacy for the men's head basketball job. And I had my resume with me, and my resume had an error on it. And I made the mistake. He said, well, so you went to school, you got your degree at the same school for all 3 schools. I said, no, sir, I went to University of Mobile for my undergrad. He's like, it says here you went to the United States Sports Academy. And I remember looking at it and just this dread came over. Right. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I really made myself look stupid. Mm-hmm. Well, the moral of the story is that, well, the result was I didn't get an interview. And I think that, you know, we're not perfect. We make mistakes.
It happens. But you have to learn from it, right? You have to make sure that you are conscientious. Like, I've had that happen where you're filling out cover letters for universities and you have, hey, I have a template that I use that's kind of a rough outline, and you forget to change the school that you're actually applying to, and you're like, ah, crap, like I messed that one up.
Done that before too. Yep. Yeah. And I think that, but it's really extremely important to understand you're not perfect, but, you know, you can at least attempt to get to perfection, you know, and I think that that's so critically important. 2 questions. One question in particular. What's one piece of advice that you would give the folks that are watching at home about, you know, success in this field and in the field of sports? What's one piece of advice?
You got to be patient. You know, it's very rarely is it going to take off very quickly in anything that you do. And that's something I try and convey to, you know, my clients. The idea of, you know, we can't guarantee our future. Like, we don't know if we're going to win a tournament. We don't know if we're going to, you know, get an A on an exam. We don't know any of that. And a lot of times those things are out of our control. But what we do have control over is the process, the sort of front end piece. And what I always try and challenge myself to do and challenge my clients to do is aim to get better every single day. Even if it's a minute amount, 0.0001% every single day for the rest of your life. If you can do that, you're going to be amazed at how great you can be. Too often we get wrapped up in, well, I want to be great today. Yeah, but what if you can be great 10 years from now? And that's okay. So really just trying to value the process and get better every single day out there. And if you can do that, the rest will kind of take care of itself.
Good advice. Now, one last question, and I think this is really important. Again, we have a lot of people watching this video that are in the field of sport management. Mm-hmm. And these are people that are going to be doing a lot of different jobs, perhaps, or at least everyone does in the sport field. Right. We all wear a lot of hats. But one thing that I want you to share is the importance of sport and performance psychology in the world of sports, as far as coaching, as far as, like, these folks might end up being administrators, athletic directors, in a college or a high school. Sell the importance of sport and performance psychology to these people.
So it's so funny. I was having this conversation last night in a class I was teaching. It's an alternative populations class. So it's basically taking performance psychology principles and applying them in military, high risk, business populations, performing arts, so on and so forth. And so what I reminded them, I said, all right, so show of hands, who in here thinks physical training is important to performance? Every single one of them raised their hand. I said, all right, who in here would be comfortable paying for physical training to improve their performance? Every single one of them raised their hand. I said, okay. Now, show of hands, who thinks mental performance is important to performance? Everyone raised their hand. I said, show of hands, who in here would pay for mental training to improve their performance? And like one or two raised their hand. That's the biggest challenge, right? Is getting people to understand that the mental side is as important or more important than the physical side, because physical, there's a lot of variability. Mental, it's going to be sustainable over a longer term period of time. So when you're dealing with administrators, when you're dealing with parents, when you're dealing with coaches, when you're dealing with organizations, whatever it might be, I think at the core, everybody understands that the mental side is important. But our challenge is how do we crystallize it in a digestible format where we can show them, hey, here's what we do and here's how it can help, instead of just like, hey, they're going to feel better or they're going to be more confident. Those are very vague terms. But if we can actually have something that is comprehensible, it's a number that actually suggests something the same way that, hey, I'm 10% stronger, 20% faster, whatever it might be, I think that will go a long way. So, hey, we know the mental side is what, 90% of sports? Everybody says that. That's the joke. So if that's the case, why are we not spending our resources to improve the 90% of our athletic ability or our performance ability?
I think you sold it pretty well. I think that I've said this on a couple of videos, I believe, but when I look back to when I graduated college in 1993, sport management in and of itself, it's something that's been around, just like sports psychology in its own way has been around for years, 100 years or more. But no one really understood what sport management was. And so, I'll never forget, I said, I got my degree in physical education in undergrad, and I certainly didn't want to I didn't want to be a PE teacher, I really wanted to get into sport as a career. And I'll never forget seeing one of the first, sport management programs out there and wanting to attend that for my master's degree. And I remember telling people, yeah, I'm going to go for sports management. And they said, oh, so sports medicine, right? I said, no, sports management. Right. And now, back then, I think there were maybe 10 schools in the United States that actually had sport management as an academic discipline. Now we're looking at over 350 to 400 schools in the United States that have it. And I think that sport performance psychology is kind of in that same boat. We're only talking about 26 years later. Mm-hmm. I think that sports psychology is starting to really take off because we're starting to see people look at sports psychology as a very important piece to the success of a team, or to a successful individual performance. For me, working with the Irish basketball teams. In fact, I just before this conversation, I had in the process from here in the United States trying to get, the under 14, under 15 academies camp for next week north of Dublin, get them some, introductory psychology presenters.
Right.
None of them have ever heard it before.
Yeah.
And we're talking about there are going to be over 400 kids at this camp. And, and we're trying to get that all sorted out. But it's one of those things where, for me, I think it's great because the people over there are starting to see how it can make a difference in true performance,
right.
Not just being stronger, being more fit. It's both. It's here and it's in the physical.
Well, I try and explain to all the people that I work with that, yeah, these skills that I work with you on or that I teach you, they're going to help you as an athlete. Don't get me wrong. But they're also going to just help you in life. They're going to make you better throughout your life. And so if you can improve all aspects, or if I can make you better as a performer in your day-to-day life, then I've done my job, even if I didn't help you become a better athlete, right? So understanding that these skills are kind of universal and they will help you be a better person, a better human throughout the rest of your life.
Well, right. And I think that, it truly isn't something that, and I think that's the one thing I try to really clarify with my students, because sometimes, they'll say, well, all you care about APA formatting, Dr. Rice. I'm like, no, that's not it. You're not understanding the method of my madness.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being able to follow the standards.
Yeah. That
it'd be like if you were going for an ASP, certification or whatever, and your CPMC or whatever, and you don't have you don't have
your hours, right?
Yeah, you don't have your hours. You're not doing what is asked of you. Well, it's the same thing. It's all a question of, are you going to be disciplined enough to do what's asked of you?
Yeah, it's the equivalent of, sometimes I'll get papers or I'll get essays from students, and I tell them, I'm like, this paper is incredibly well written. Like, it's an awesome paper. If this was on topic, it'd be an A paper. But I'm like, this is the equivalent of writing a paper about the sky being blue when I asked you to tell me how to write a recipe for baked chicken. Like, they're not doing the same thing. Like, this is really, really good, but it has no bearing or nothing. It's not connected to what we actually need to talk about. And so, yeah, I think students need to understand conscientiousness goes a long way. If you answer it the correct way, you're probably going to do okay.
Right. And I think, one of the other things that's really critical and is, to follow the expectations or the directions, because that's what's going to be asked of you in the field that you go into, whether you're doing consulting in sport and performance psychology, whether you're going to be an athletic director or an intern for an athletic program or a coach or whatever. We all have to be able to follow the directions.
Right.
And when they're specific, like you need references and a reference slide for your PowerPoint presentation. It's been my pet peeve today because I had like 6 students in another school who had problems with that, not following the directions, and they got bummed. They failed the presentation because I said, look, I told you, and these are all the points that are being taken off.
Yeah.
I think that, that's one of those things where I just wanted to ask you about that because to share with the class really how important performance psychology is for the sport manager who's going to be leading a high school or a college athletic program or even a club program in some other country, because it matters. It
really does. And just, these are universal skills. These are things that will benefit everybody. And if you can find people who can pass them along and help others learn them, you're helping everybody, right? And that's what we're trying to do. That's why we're in this field, is to help people.
Absolutely. So as we close, Paul, are you open to having folks reach out to you if I were to share your email?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. And what I'll do, everyone, is I'll make sure that when I post this to YouTube, of course, you've already watched it, so it's posted to YouTube, but I'll make sure in the YouTube video that the email contact information is there. And Paul, any last words as we close?
Honestly, just hopefully my insights can help people along. I've been lucky enough to have a lot of people throughout my professional development kind of help guide me along the way. And that's kind of how I feel in my responsibilities. I have a funny story that you mentioned CMPC earlier. And so I'm in my recertification year, and I just took the certification exam. And earlier in the year, I was kind of on the fence about like, oh, do I really even want to like take the certification exam? Do I even want to recertify? Because like, honestly, it hasn't really helped me a ton. And so I was talking with a colleague, and he's like, it's not about you or me. Like, this probably isn't going to really impact us in a huge manner, right? But what you're doing is you're setting a standard for everybody else who comes behind us. And I was like, yeah, you know what? You're right. Like, I'm not doing it for me and what's going to be in my best interest. I'm worried about everybody who's behind me. And so when I get to do things like this, it's my way of trying to give back the same way that people gave back to me. So yeah, I'm more than happy to do things like this.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Dr. Paul Ashbrook, thank you so much for taking the last 45 minutes or so to talk with us about your path to where you're at right now. And guys and gals that are out there watching, again, Dr. Ashbrook is willing to talk with you. Just even if you're not a sport and performance psychology person, he's got a lot of great insight and experience in the sport world. Reach out to him and ask him questions. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to answer them. And Dr. Ashbrook, thanks again for taking your time, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay, guys, until the next time in the next session, hope you all have a great one, and we'll see you down the road.